Okay, great. So I thought we could start today's webinar with a little input from the audience. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. We'll be using a tool called Slido to gather your input. If you've never used Slido, don't worry, it's pretty easy. You can either use your phone to scan the QR code on the screen right now, or you can open up another browser on your computer and go to slido.com and then enter the 7-digit code in the blue box at the top of the page that says join as a participant. Again, the 7-digit code is 1902119, or you can just scan the QR code that you see on your screen. And I'll give everyone a few seconds to get Slido pulled up and to make it to their page and enter the code. And then we'll start with the first question. Okay, so this is a poll question, and it should be a pretty easy one. How familiar are you with the topic of knowledge management? And as people respond, we'll see the results here on the screen in real time. Please, if you haven't already, scan the QR code in the top left corner or go to slido.com and enter that. Oh, we've got some responses and enter that 7-digit code. Okay. All right. We've got some solid background. Okay, this is good. We've got some people here who will hopefully have some really good examples to share when we get to the Q&A opportunities, the discussion question opportunities. Great. Okay, we've got some people who have a basic knowledge, some folks who, we've got an expert, or at least one expert. That's great. Okay, cool. No one who's completely green. Okay. All right. So most folks have at least a basic understanding of KM. Okay, this is good. All right. So we've got 11 responses. Maybe we'll leave this up just for a couple minutes longer to see what kind of mix of people we have here. And this will be really helpful for me. Your responses will help me understand your level of knowledge, and I can adjust things accordingly as we're going through the webinar today. Okay, looks like half of the respondents have a solid background. 38% have some basic knowledge, and it looks like we have a couple of experts on the call. Okay, cool. These polls will stay open, so if you want to go back and look later, you can feel free to do that. If you're just now joining, scan the QR code and participate in this first poll that we have here, so we know a little bit of background on your knowledge management background. Okay, great. All right. I'm going to move on now to another Slido question. This one is for fun. In 1 or 2 words, what comes to mind when you hear knowledge management? And as you type in your responses, they'll pop up on the screen, and it's going to start to populate a word cloud. So think about in 1 or 2 words, what do you think of when you hear knowledge management? Sharing knowledge, insights, information, learning, collective intelligence. I like that one. It's a good one. Communication of know-how, peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. Great. See some folks are still typing. Organizing knowledge. Learning from others' mistake or success. Yes, that's a good one. Systems and processes, definitely. Great. Okay, fantastic. We've still got some people typing. Great, thank you. I think that was kind of fun. I wanted to get you guys all involved this morning so that, we're all active and awake. I know it's potentially early for some folks. Some folks, it might be late in the day. So thanks for joining if it is late in your day. Okay, and there's still some comments coming in. Great, knowledge repository. Good. Okay, we'll talk about a lot of these things today. And if we don't cover something that is very important to you, then feel free at the end of the session to bring that up or to ask some questions. We'll have time for Q&A at the end too. Okay. So I mentioned at the start of the webinar that this is an introduction to knowledge management. So we'll cover some of the basics like the definition, benefits, key components, and practical applications of KM. We're hoping to do more of these sessions. So in future sessions, we can dive a little deeper into some of the topics that I know some of our experts might be really eager to discuss. And at the end of the session, stick around, we'll have a poll and you'll have a chance to let us know what kinds of topics you would like to hear about in future sessions. But we're going to start with sort of the basics today. So I thought we could start with the definition. What is knowledge management? A lot of people who don't know or aren't familiar with KM or find it very confusing or almost sort of mystical. What does knowledge management mean? So we'll start with talking about some definitions. KM has been around for a while, since about the 1980s or so, when businesses began to recognize that knowledge was an important company asset and should be managed accordingly. As KM gained steam and companies began to build their own KM programs, this spawned many definitions of KM. I actually read an article once where someone tried to document all the various definitions, but they gave up and stopped counting when they reached more than 100 unique definitions. So I'm not going to bore you with all of the various definitions, but I thought I would share a few that are relevant to our sector, to the development sector. Let's start with a very kind of basic generic definition from the Cambridge Dictionary. They define KM as the way in which knowledge is organized and used within a company, or the study of how to effectively organize and use it. I've also included a couple of definitions from international development organizations. USAID refers to KM as the generation, curation, sharing, and use of knowledge to create value or support decision-making in context. I also have the Asian Development Bank definition up on the screen. They define KM as the explicit and systematic management of processes enabling vital individual and collective knowledge. Someone mentioned collective knowledge earlier. Resources to be identified, created, stored, shared, and used for benefit. Its practical expression is the fusion of information management and organizational learning. I really like that ADB includes organizational learning in its definition. I think this speaks to the idea that knowledge isn't static and we should be continuously learning and advancing our knowledge. USAID has also put new emphasis on organizational learning with its latest draft knowledge management and organizational learning policy that will guide the agency's efforts to, quote, harness its cumulative knowledge, learn from it, and apply those lessons to achieve better results, end quote. So these are just a few definitions that I wanted to share with you so that in case you are not as familiar with KM or wonder what is KM and how do you define it. We, like many other organizations, have our own definition of knowledge management at Consult KM. We define it as a discipline focused on ensuring that knowledge within an organization is generated, captured, stored, made accessible, shared, and used by those within the organization for the overall benefit of the organization. KM aims to create and/or enhance a systemic framework to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of an organization at all levels by strengthening internal processes and approaches to knowledge storing, management, and exchange. So as you can see, there is no single agreed upon definition for KM. And in my opinion, I don't think it matters so much what definition you use for KM as long as it fits the goals that you're trying to achieve through your organization's KM program. So really, and you'll hear me say this later or more in the presentation, that KM really should be tailored to your organization. There is no one size fits all. Okay, so we've talked about what KM is, but why does it matter? Why do we need it? Most development organizations and partners would agree that their most critical asset is the collective knowledge of their staff. This knowledge is too valuable not to prioritize and manage appropriately, especially in development, where the risk of not learning from our past mistakes, our past projects, or wasting time starting from scratch can have unintended negative human impacts. And almost all of the major international development donors and funders understand the importance of KM. UNICEF and the World Health Organization both have knowledge management strategies. The World Bank and the Asian Development Bank have knowledge management action plans. The U.S. Agency for International Development just recently shared a draft policy on knowledge management and organizational learning. And all of these organizations have teams and staff to support KM. And those are just a few examples. There's many, many more. But someone from a smaller organization might say, that all sounds great, but we're a small organization and we don't have the money or we don't have the time to do KM. We're just too busy for that, much like the cartoon that's on the screen right now. But the value of KM is that when you're doing it right, you should see a reduction in the time and resources to achieve the same outputs or better outputs, and productivity should rise. So really, you don't have time or money, you don't have the time or money not to do KM. It's more costly and time consuming if you're not managing your knowledge efficiently. So that's this sort of a why should we care for folks who maybe in your organization you have people who question why it's important. So that's a couple of examples of why do we need KM? Why is it important? And then you could back that up with benefits. What are some of the benefits of KM? One of the most frequently cited benefits is reduced time to find information. One study of knowledge managers from a wide range of industries, company sizes, and geographies asked the question, what tangible benefits have you seen so far from knowledge management? The most common benefit identified by over 3/4 of those surveyed was a reduction in time to find information. And this can have a real impact in an organization, especially if you have staff who need to find knowledge and information on a daily basis just to do their jobs. Some of the other benefits that were mentioned in the survey included reduced time to competence for new staff. So like staff onboarding. We all know how valuable it is to be able to get staff in and onboarded and up to speed quickly. Reduced project or operational costs were also mentioned. Reduced project or activity cycle time, and improved customer and client satisfaction. And all of these can lead to increased team performance. KM can also add value in intangible ways. Increased employee satisfaction is often a benefit that organizations recognize after implementing KM programs or practices, which makes sense if the time it takes to get new employees up to speed is reduced and it's easier for employees to find the information they need to do their jobs. KM can also provide leaders with an increased understanding of business issues and challenges. And these intangible benefits are the kind that help to foster and contribute to overall business success. These are just really a handful of some of the benefits that KM can provide. There are many, many others. And I'm curious what kind of benefits you've seen in your work. So I'm going to take a pause now and give our attendees a chance to share their experiences in this area. Asking the question, what are the outcomes or benefits you've seen using KM in a project or an organization? If you're in the Zoom webinar, you can raise your hand to be unmuted and share your example, or you can type it in the chat and we'll read it aloud. If you're joining by a live stream, feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section as well. And my colleagues, Natalia and Nicola will read those aloud too. So we'll give folks an opportunity to think about this. What are some of the benefits that you've seen or experienced of KM? And if you want to come off mute, raise your hand. And you can see in the bottom center of the screen, there's a raise hand function. If you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can share with the rest of the group what some of the benefits you've experienced are. Okay. Everyone's really quiet this morning. Okay. We've got an example from Simon. Increased understanding of what different colleagues and departments contribute to the overall success of the organization. That's a great one. Because we're usually so focused on what we're doing, we often forget about what other folks are doing in the organization and why that's important. Great. Any other thoughts or comments? Connecting people from different countries doing similar work. Great, that's a good example, Pam. Yes. Carla, not reinventing the wheel. Yes. Sometimes the organization already has what you need, even if you have to adapt it 100%. This happens so much. I think we've probably all been in that situation where you feel like, why am I doing this all over again? I know we did this 6 months ago or a year ago, but why do I have to recreate the wheel every time? That's a big one. Yeah, because you can save a lot of time and money and frustration if you have something that you can start from and not start from scratch. Successful handovers, yes, that's a big one, especially when you've got people retiring or leaving their posts and moving on to other positions. So much institutional knowledge can be lost. So KM is a great way to make sure that we transfer that knowledge and retain it. Thanks, Liz. Good. Okay. Yeah. And Carla mentions that sometimes people just don't know where to look for this information. Yes, that is a big challenge. Yes. Maybe that information exists, but it's not readily available. People don't know where to go to find it. Yeah, that's good. Good, good, good. Okay, great. And does anyone want to come off of mute and share their comment? Let's see. Simon says increased confidence in funders and investors, that the organization is focused on applying resources to the front line rather than admin. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Agree, Liz. That's a good one. Great. Okay. Yeah. So you can see there's so many benefits that KM can bring to an organization. Okay. Great. All right. Well, let's move on. Working out loud. I like that too. That's a good one. I'll have some more opportunities for you guys to share. So keep your thoughts flowing here. All right, we're going to move on to another topic. So most good KM programs are comprised of and give equal attention to three key components: people, process, and technology. These are the key ingredients to build and grow a sustainable program. The people component refers to informal networks for knowledge sharing, as well as time and flexibility to share knowledge and create new ideas. This component is also associated with organizational culture and values. Some examples include storytelling, informal exchanges like lunch and learns or brown bag sessions, and opportunities to build relationships and connections with your team members and others within the organization. The process component includes ways to capture knowledge and learn from success and failure. So examples there would be pause and reflect activities like after action reviews, or other ways that knowledge is systematically captured and shared within an organization, like a formal community of practice. The third component, the technology component, as you would guess, is the IT tools and systems that support KM. So these are like portals and intranets and knowledge repositories. This component can also be considered infrastructure, and that could include virtual, physical, and communal spaces that enable KM and knowledge sharing, like the water cooler, or digital platforms like Slack, Yammer, and Workplace that bring people together online. And those tools have become even more important now that it seems like we're all remote, or we're working across different time zones in different countries. And a note about technology: although it is a very important tool to support KM, technology solution alone is not KM. This is where I've seen organizations run into trouble. They might focus so much of their attention on the technology component that they fail to recognize the importance of the processes to uncover and capture knowledge, and the people and values that enable a knowledge sharing culture. I like to think of these three components as the three-leg stool. If one leg is missing or neglected, you'll be out of balance and you'll topple over. A successful KM program should address each of these three components and find balance among them. That's the key to success. And not mentioned in the slide, but also important, are some enabling factors that can make these three components possible. A couple of those are leadership support and resources or funding to implement activities. Without those two pieces, are those two enabling factors in place, it can be very difficult to establish the three components: people, process, and technology, and to be able to move those things forward with your KM program. So I just mentioned a couple of enabling factors that are important to the success of KM programs. That's actually a good segue into my next topic, which is challenges and pitfalls. These are some of the common challenges that I've noticed in my work with various organizations in the development sector. They're probably not unique to international development, but they're pretty common in our sector. The first one is a lack of awareness. And that sort of goes back to a comment that I think Carla made earlier, that sometimes people just don't know where to look for information. So, this could mean that employees don't know what KM is or don't understand their role, or maybe the employees aren't aware of the various resources and tools that are available to support them. And that piece can be really frustrating for those of us in KM who have worked so hard to develop tools and systems to support KM. In the past, I've had some success with developing awareness campaigns and branding KM to help increase awareness. In one organization, we had a knowledge database that captured tons of useful information about our projects and our proposals. And we on the KM team worked really hard to build out the content in that system, but we were finding that people weren't using it. They were still asking their colleagues for this type of information instead of looking it up themselves. So we developed an awareness campaign with lots of fun activities and prizes to encourage people to try out the system. And we even had t-shirts printed and with the name of the system, and we wore those during the campaign to get people's attention. And it worked. People started to pay attention. People became more aware of these tools that were available to support them with KM. I think oftentimes it's really easy for those of us in KM who've been working on these activities and tools to assume that others are as informed as we are, or know as much about them as we do, because we live it and breathe it. It's our everyday. But folks are really busy, and it's easy for them to overlook KM sometimes. So really, communications and awareness building should be part of your KM strategy. Don't assume that people will know or understand. You really have to be actively communicating what you're doing and the tools that you've made available to the staff within your organization. Which actually brings me to my second challenge, or a common challenge, which is a lack of time. I think most of us who work in the development sector are really very dedicated and mission driven, which often leads us to take on more work than can be accomplished in the standard 40-hour work week. We're busy people, which sometimes doesn't leave a lot of time for KM. So if staff are too busy and they feel overworked, they don't take the time to engage in knowledge sharing opportunities, whether that's seeking out new knowledge or sharing the knowledge they've gained from their work. So we as KM practitioners need to find ways to build KM into the flow of work to make it easier. We need to try to optimize the user experience in our software tools and minimize the number of systems and platforms that people need to navigate to do their work. Another big challenge that I've seen is a lack of leadership support. If leadership doesn't buy into what you're doing, then they won't encourage their staff to support it. And then no one will pay attention to what you're trying to accomplish. It's really important to make sure that you have leadership on board from the start. Engage them in early strategy development efforts so they feel like they have some level of buy-in. Identify champions at the leadership and management level who can advocate for KM. One of the most important things that you can do is make sure that your KM program and strategy align with the organization's overall strategy. If KM is successful, then that will help the organization succeed and meet its goals if your KM strategy is aligned with the organization's strategy. And really, what leader wouldn't support that? If KM can help the organization accomplish its goals, then that seems like an easy win for me. Another challenge that I've seen frequently is knowledge silos. And some of you are probably pretty aware of this term or this situation. But for those of you who aren't, knowledge silos occur when teams or business units don't communicate or share knowledge with each other. So basically all of the knowledge sort of is contained within that one team or that unit, and then other teams or units within the organization either don't have the opportunity to tap into that or just aren't aware of that knowledge that's being developed and generated. So this, it typically leads to a lot of staff frustration, duplication of work, as we mentioned earlier, and missed opportunities. And there are strategies to address this challenge too. For example, you could establish communities of practice across teams and encourage formal and informal opportunities for employee interaction and engagement outside of teams. So I want to stop here. I think this is a topic where we can learn a lot from our attendees or our colleagues on the in the webinar. So I want to stop and, I've been doing a lot of talking. So I'll stop and let you guys have a chance to chime in and share what some of the challenges that you face when implementing KM are. If you are in the Zoom webinar, again, feel free to raise your hand and we'll take you off mute so you can share your example, or you can type it in the chat. If you're joining on live stream, feel free to share your comments there as well, and we'll have one of my colleagues will read those aloud. Okay, so Carla has had a challenge in getting people to use the database. Yes, I totally feel that. Yeah, it's hard because it's another system sometimes that people just aren't used to using. So you really have to build awareness around that and show them, what value it can provide. Yeah, that's great. Any other challenges out there that people have faced? Oh, yes, Carrie. This happens a lot, I think, in our industry where knowledge is power, so it's not shared. And that's where you get that knowledge hoarding, where people feel like if I am the expert and I have the knowledge, then I'll continue to be employed. So they're not as eager or willing to share their knowledge. That's a tough one. That's really where culture comes into play. That's where it's really important for an organization to build that culture of knowledge sharing and reward knowledge sharing. Let's see, finding the right platform framework for, I lost that, for so many knowledge processes. Yes, that's a tough one. Yes. Changing behaviors. Yes, that is really hard. And it's a slow process too. Changing behaviors. You want to maybe start with some small, quick wins, and then things will start to snowball. Or maybe find some key influencers who you can get on your side, who are really believers. And once they start to see the benefit, they can start to influence their networks, and then people will start to adopt. Let's see, Simon says that in a collaborative environment, there can be different levels of restrictions on sharing information and evidence. And some partners are willing to share, others are restricted by culture or law. Well, that's a good point too. In some cases, some things just might not be able to be shared. But certainly there's a lot that we could be sharing that we probably aren't. Let's see, Carolina mentions when they confuse KM with communications. Yes, that happens a lot, I think. And I think because sometimes KM and communications overlap. I see that a lot in the USAID space where KM roles are often a hybrid of KM and communications. So I think that doesn't help either because it kind of blurs the lines a lot. Champions are so important. Yes. Let's see. Homan says leadership thinks about KM much too late after a project or a program has started, while people just focus on their technical work and don't think KM require their contributions too. Yes, I can't tell you how many times an organization will reach out to me and say, oh, we have a project that's ending in 4 months and we want to capture all the knowledge. And it's so frustrating because knowledge management, you should be doing that from the start. It's so hard to go back and try to capture things that happened 5 years ago because people have left, staff turnover and move on to other organizations, or, people just forget what they did 5 years ago. Projects are fast paced. There's a lot going on. So if you're serious about CAM, you really need to be doing it from the start and putting practices in place that help capture that knowledge from the start, and not just at the end when all of a sudden you need to demonstrate what you've done and what you've learned. Let's see, what other comments do we have? Not having a permanent platform to keep the material, as many projects end after a time. Yes, that's a challenge too. Keeping the commitment to share updated information and knowledge with other colleagues. Yes, that's hard. It is a commitment, and people need to be reminded to keep information up to date, because as we mentioned, a lot of projects in the development sector are fast paced and change quickly, and what might have been accurate 6 months ago may have changed and is different now. So it's important to keep that information in our systems up to date. Let's see, Simon says, some leaders view CAM as a way of directing activity. It's instruction masquerading as collaboration. And it can be helpful to differentiate between sharing specific info that helps to improve existing practice and stimulating new thinking and practice. Confusing the two can cause confusion and frustration. Oh, that's a great point. Yes, because you want to be able to share information and knowledge that can help improve existing practice. But we also want to be learning. We want to be stimulating new thinking and innovation on how could we do something better, not just, these guys did it this way, so we should do it that way because it worked for them. But how can we continue to improve? That goes back to that idea I mentioned at the beginning, that knowledge shouldn't be static. We should be constantly adding to our knowledge and improving it. Great examples. Thanks for sharing. Okay. Let's see. Okay, let's move on to another topic. And we talked a little bit about some of the theoretical aspects of CAM, like the definition, benefits, key components of a CAM program. Let's talk about some of the practical applications of CAM and how CAM can be integrated into an organization. What might that look like? And this is the kind of stuff that I find really fun, like the CAM activities where it's CAM in action, I like to think. So there's lots of activities that you can implement to generate, capture, share, and utilize knowledge within your organization. For the sake of time, I just have a few here that I'll mention, but then I'm going to tap on the audience to share too, because I really want to hear from you guys what you think are some good applications of CAM. So I mentioned earlier communities of practice. Communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do, and they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. Communities of practice are a tried and true method for generating and sharing knowledge within an organization. They can also be very beneficial in breaking down those knowledge silos that I mentioned earlier that tend to form around projects or business units. Communities of practice can also help build expertise in critical technical areas. This might be a helpful tool if you want to make sure that technical staff in a particular topic area are applying the best practices and proven approaches across projects, and then they're learning from and improving upon those practices and approaches, to what Simon mentioned earlier, that we're stimulating new thinking and practice. Communities of practice are great for enabling and fostering that kind of thinking. Another CAM tool or activity is the after action review. After action reviews are a type of pause and reflect activity. If you're familiar with USAID and the collaborating, learning, and adapting framework, you'll recognize pause and reflect and after action reviews as some activities that they suggest. After action reviews are usually conducted when a project or an activity ends, or after a significant event within a project is completed. After action reviews are an opportunity for individuals who were involved in the project to learn for themselves what happened. It's an opportunity to stop and reflect on what happened, why it happened, what went well, and what needs improvement, and what lessons can be learned from that experience. When these lessons learned are documented and shared widely, they can be then valuable for improving the implementation of future projects. Some organizations even develop lessons learned databases, or they create repositories to capture and share the outputs from after action reviews. And speaking of repositories, that's another typical application of KM. There are tons and tons of software solutions that can help companies collect and organize their knowledge for easy digital access by employees. And there's a wide range of solutions that you can implement based on your needs and your budget. I've seen solutions as simple and low cost as Google spreadsheets that are used to organize and categorize content for easy filtering and searching. I've also worked on and supported large KM platforms that were built on systems like Drupal with defined taxonomies and content models and search. One good example of a knowledge repository that I would encourage you to visit for more information on knowledge management is the USAID Learning Lab website, and that's at usaidlearninglab.org. You'll find lots of resources and tools to help you integrate KM and learning activities into your work. It's really a fabulous resource. So those are just a few examples of practical applications of KM. I'm going to stop again and give our attendees a chance to share some processes or methods that they've used or seen used for capturing and sharing knowledge. Feel free to raise your hand. No one has yet, but I'm hopeful that someone will want to speak. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can share your example. Or you can type it in the chat if you're feeling shy this morning. And again, if you're in the live stream, feel free to leave your comments there as well. Natalia and Nicola, I've forgotten to ask if we're getting comments through the live stream. Any comments popping up there?
For now, we don't have nothing. We have nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, our live streamers, we want to hear from you too. What are some processes or methods that you've used or seen used for capturing and sharing knowledge? Maybe what's your favorite KM activity? How about that? Let's see. Everyone's very quiet all of a sudden. For knowledge transfer, Liz says, for knowledge transfer, mentoring and videos. Oh, it's going fast. Ilana mentioned knowledge elicitation interviews. That's a good one. Ricardo, integrating chats with knowledge base, creating exit interview formats for knowledge capture. Those are so helpful. Communities of practice. Yeah, that's one of my favorites too. Any others? Maybe some that are not as common. Retrospective workshops, and then getting the data into recommendations. Yes, it's so important to actually do something with what comes out of those sessions. Yeah, I mean, they're useful for the people who are in them because they're discussing and learning. But then if that information doesn't get shared, then it doesn't make it very far. So it's really important to find ways to share that information more broadly. Simon mentions a collaboration academy designed to bring different leaders from a local area to focus on an issue of mutual issue. For instance, youth unemployment and aging well. Oh, that's a great one. I like that. Kind of reminds me of maybe like study tours and peer assists. Homan mentioned internal capacity, training and knowledge sharing, brown bag lunch. Those are so low cost and low effort and easy. You know, find someone within your organization who maybe they presented at a conference recently, and ask them to share that informally at a brown bag. They've already done the work to put together the presentation. It shouldn't be hard. So yeah, those kinds of things are really helpful. And it gives people a chance to ask more questions and learn from that individual. And then you create a relationship, and then you're making those connections that are so important. Liz mentions keeping the conversation going and captured after a learning event. Yes. Peer assists. Yes, these are all great examples. Yes. Okay. Any comments in the live stream? Still quiet over there? Okay.
Yeah, nothing for now.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Nicola. All right. Okay, great. Those are great examples. Okay. So let's move on to the next topic. So if you are perhaps just getting started in setting up a CAM program in your organization, you might wonder, where should CAM sit? And as a side note, we recently published a blog on this topic, and you can check that out on our website if you're curious. Our web address is in the footer of the slides here. But this is a common question, and I've had this discussion with many people. Where does CAM fit? Where should it fit or sit? According to, so I looked into this a little bit. I was curious, what are other organizations doing? I know where I've seen it, but what's sort of like the industry standard? So according to a 2022 benchmarking survey by APQC, they found that 28% of respondents working in KM report to human resources. 26% indicated that KM staff reported to the C-suite, meaning that there is like a chief knowledge officer, or that it has its own business unit or department. 14% report to information strategy or IT, and 9% reported to operations. The remaining 23% of respondents said that KM staff report to various functions within the organization. So you can see from that data that it's pretty mixed, and there is no one size fits all approach to KM, as I mentioned before. And really, there shouldn't be. It should be tailored to your organization and its needs. So there's two factors that can help you decide on KM's best fit within your organization. First, you want to think about what organizational goals you're trying to align with. For example, are you focused on faster onboarding of new staff? If so, then you might want to position KM within your human resources department. Are you more focused on trying to improve project implementation? And maybe you want to make sure that you are learning from past lessons and improving implementation moving forward. If that's the case, then operations might be the best fit for you. Are you hoping to maybe have more success with proposals, win new work in the future? If that's the case, then business development might be the right place for KM to sit. Then you can also think about the organizational challenges that you're trying to tackle with KM. Are your challenges around knowledge silos? If so, then you'd want KM to sit at a level that can have an impact across teams. So maybe the C-suite would be the right place, with its own business unit, so they can reach across teams and encourage more interaction. Are you maybe facing a large technology rollout or upgrade? If that's the case, maybe, for example, you're looking at rolling out a new file sharing platform like SharePoint. If that's the case, then IT might be the best place for KM to add value. So really, I mean, it comes down to what are your needs and your goals within your organization. And once you've identified that, then it should be pretty clear where KM makes the most sense and where it should sit. So since we have a good number of people here, I'm kind of curious. I want to take our own survey and see from you guys where KM sits in your organization. So if you still have Slido open, go ahead and pull up this question. It should pop up for you. If you've closed Slido, you can scan the QR code again, or you can go to slido.com and enter that 7-digit number that's displayed in the bottom left-hand corner of this screen. And tell us where KM sits in your organization. I'm curious, how are things organized for each of you? Okay, so we've got IT, operations, other. Okay, if you answered other, can you drop in the chat what business unit or department KM sits within? I'm curious. Communications. Aha. Yes, I've seen that too. Yes. Okay. Oh, there's a lot of others. Okay. Strategy. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. KM makes a lot of sense in strategy. M&E. Yes, yes, a knowledge management. I could see knowledge management fitting really well into M&E. Safina says, or is asking if every division in an organization or company should have their own KM, or should it focus in one division only? That's a good question, Safina. So I think it maybe depends a little bit on how large your organization is. So I've seen both. I've seen where KM sort of has an overall role within a business unit, and then there are KM staff in other units throughout the organization, and they sort of have a loose or a dotted line to the main KM organization. And you see that a lot in big organizations where they have where they're just so large that, you know, maybe KM started in one business unit and then it popped up in another. There's nothing wrong with that. Although I will say I've seen recently where that can become a challenge. If there is KM in lots of different divisions or departments and they're not coordinating well, that can create a lot of challenges, because then you might run into situations where you've got proliferation of systems, where maybe the operations KM team has developed a system to track projects, and maybe the business development KM team has developed a system to track proposals, but they're not connected. So I think it can work, but you have to be very careful that you're communicating, that the KM staff and all of these different divisions and departments are working together and not independently, because you don't want to create that situation where you have just a proliferation of systems and tools and people become confused. That could be really bad for KM, because then folks will say, I don't know what system to use. I don't know where to go. I'm just not going to bother. So a word of caution if you're thinking of that type of a organization. I see another person has mentioned M&E. That's a good one. And KM serves multiple goals, so it sits some places, not specifically in a department. Okay, yeah, great. Okay. So it looks like most everyone has other as their response. Got some IT here. No one in HR, which is funny because that survey I mentioned, the majority of KM staff sat in HR. So it seems maybe development organizations think about KM differently and therefore organize it differently. This is great. I think that we as Consult KM will try to actually do a survey like this, maybe with a broader, wider audience. Really curious how organizations are organizing their KM. Okay, Natalia has a knowledge leadership, which is mostly research evidence generation. Oh, great. Oh, that's from Abby. Thanks, Abby. Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for sharing. Let's see, that brings us to the end of the presentation, and I realize we're very close to the top of the hour. I'll stop and open it up for questions really quickly now. If you're in the Zoom webinar, you can raise your hand to be unmuted and you can share your questions, or you can type them in the chat. If you're on the live stream, feel free to share your questions there as well. If we don't get through all the questions, then we can try to answer them later, maybe through LinkedIn. We'll figure out a way to respond. So we'll give folks a minute or two. Let's see if we've got some questions coming in. Okay. Oh, it looks like we, do we offer or recommend any KM courses? Focused on nonprofits is better. Oh, that's a good question. You know, what is Consult KM about? Okay, Marilyn, I will come back to that. To Carla's question, there's a few. So I would recommend, I'm a big fan of communities of practice. There is a community of practice called KM for Dev. And if you join that community of practice, they often post about different training or certification programs in KM. I think that there's one that's happening soon, and I can't remember the details about it. But I encourage you to join that community of practice. It's a great resource. especially, everyone who is a CAM practitioner on this call should join CAM for Dev. Lots of great information there. And Marilyn has a question about what Consult CAM is. So we're a consulting firm. We work with mostly international development, humanitarian, and nonprofit sectors. We specialize in reporting and storytelling, proposal writing, and knowledge management. And you can find more about Consult CAM on our website, consultcam.international. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And hopefully one of my colleagues can drop the links to those social media accounts in the chat. And then I did see another question pop up from Simon. We'll take this as the last question and then we'll wrap up. How do we prevent organizations from becoming fixated on processes, like how people fill out forms and et cetera, at the expense of ensuring that it has a practical application? It's a great question. So it's kind of back to that balance, right? Making sure that you have balance between the people, the process, and the technology. I think, the forms are helpful and useful, but they can become, sort of tiresome as well. So I think finding ways to get people involved and engaged outside of filling out forms, brown bags or lunch and learns, those types of sessions, opportunities where people can come together, even if it's virtually, to share thoughts. I think that's a good way to balance things. What's the most rewarding thing about working at CAM or working in CAM, maybe? For me personally, it's the connections that we make. If I had to pick one of the three components that maybe is my favorite or that I'm most passionate about, I think it's people. So I get really excited about the opportunity of people coming together and sharing their knowledge and learning from each other. Just like really basic type of knowledge management and interaction. That's kind of, and seeing that happen in real time is really rewarding. And then, because then you can see the benefits of how, people improve their work, and then the projects that they're working on have better outcomes. Okay, all right, we are at time. So before everyone jumps, thank you so very much for joining. Before you log off, I want to ask you if you could take our poll. We're planning to do more of these live with an expert sessions, and your feedback will be really helpful for us to keep these interesting and engaging. So please take a couple of seconds to join the Slido again and fill out our feedback survey. It's just 3 questions. It's pretty quick. We're curious how you would rate the webinar. What could we improve or do better? And then what topics are you interested in hearing about in our future Live with the Expert sessions? So take a few minutes before you log off. And again, thank you everyone for joining and for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. It was really great to hear all of your ideas and thoughts. And again, if you'd like to learn more, follow us or visit us on our website, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter so that you can stay informed of future events like this and stay in touch. Great. Okay. Responses are coming in. Okay. Thanks, everyone.